What's up, everyone, and welcome to Lowered Expectations. Thanks for lowering your expectations and hanging out with me here. I do appreciate it. In today's video, I am going to be using Vevor's metal upgrade gear kit for their mini lathes. In the last video in this series, I unboxed this lathe and walked you guys through some of the shortcomings that it had. And one of those things is that most of these lathes actually come with a plastic drivetrain. In this video, I'm going to be replacing the plastic gears with metal ones. I will also briefly talk about some of the modifications that I've done to this lathe other than the gears. And I will hopefully explain to you guys some of the mistakes that I made so that you don't make those same mistakes. One of them being assuming that even though this lathe did not have high and low range, that I needed to take the head off. I edited most of that out because I didn't want this video to be too long. I've already made a few modifications and change to this lathe to make it a little bit more pleasant to use and just make it suit my preferences. This video is going to be focused mainly on the upgrading to the metal gears. But I did want to walk you guys quickly through some of the changes that I made. Some of them are going to be pretty obvious, like removing the chip guard from the back. I found it was way too cramped, made me claustrophobic, and so I removed it. Personally, if I was setting this up permanently, I would just make a wooden backstop or something that was 1.5 feet high and 1.5 feet back. That would give you it would stop most of the chips from going behind, and it would be much better than the one that is provided with it. That one hit the handle on the tailstock and it was just annoying. The next thing I did is removed this indicator or this dial from the compound. There's just 2 Phillips screws and it pops off. It is normally bolted on right here. And the reason why I did that is because that thing is not nearly accurate enough if you're trying to cut any sort of accurate angle. I do the same thing on mine. I'll bring you guys in a little bit closer and show you how I use this thing to actually set the compound angle up. These things are only a few dollars, and it's a good way to set a more accurate angle. The way I set the compound angle, I've got this protractor and I just snug up the nut. I don't tighten it up severely. And then I hold this piece against the cross slide and put this piece on the top of the cross slide and push it up against the compound. And then you've got a perfect contact patch on the cross slide and on the compound. And we can see here that my angle is set to exactly 29.5. In my last video, I think I briefly mentioned changing the washers for the bolts that hold the motor on. If you look here, you can see a hole in the casting and you can actually see the rear cap for the motor as well as the brush holder. The bolts for the motor come through this casting. You actually have to remove this cover. It's pretty easy. There's 4 Phillips screws and then this kind of just pivots out of the way. There are wires connected so you don't take it right off. But the issue is that the washers they used were fairly narrow or fairly thin, and there are 2 slots that allow for adjustment of the motor. And because the washers were very thin, they were crushing and causing the bolts to get loose, which then caused the motor to move around. So we've replaced them with thicker washers, and that is no longer a problem. In my last video, I believe I also mentioned performing a modification to the apron feed selector or the direction feed selector. I'm now going to kind of walk you guys through what I did for that modification and one of the mistakes that I actually made. So the first thing we're going to do is pop this cover off. It needs to come off to do the gear change anyway. Before you remove the cover from your lathe, make sure that the switch is turned off and you are disconnected from power. If the lathe turns on with your fingers in the gears, you're going to have a very bad day. The problem that this lathe had when it was new is that the dents or detents where this pin is supposed to engage, they were way too shallow. And so when you were using the cross feed to either do threading or cutting, the load on the gears would actually cause the pin to pop out. In order to figure out the ideal location of the holes, what I did is made sure that I used a spacer between the gear and this little bracket here. You could possibly make your hole too high up, and that would make it so that this gear touched this bracket, and that would be quite unfortunate because that would cause the whole head to lock up. So you don't want to do that. The measurement on the spacer, which is actually a file, is about 2.75 millimeters or 109 thousandths of an inch. So what I did is I actually took the file, I put it in between the bracket, and then I pulled up on the pin, took a hammer and tapped on this. And I didn't tap severely hard on it, but I tapped hard enough on it that it actually located a new hole position. Now that you're down a little bit closer, hopefully you can see in neutral, there is very little clearance between this gear and the gear on the spindle. And there's also very little clearance between this gear and the gear on the spindle. So if you go too far one way or the other, you're going to drag these gears on the spindle gear. So what I did to make sure that these were centered when I tapped on the end of the pin here is I took some cardstock and I jammed it in there. And I just kept jamming cardstock in there until no more would fit. And this is going to be more tricky to do on camera than it was when I wasn't filming, of course. So 44 thousandths, 48 thousandths are 1.2 millimeters. So once I had that in there, then I knew that the pin was centered. Then I took a hammer, tapped on this, and now I had my 3 locations marked. Once I had all 3 locations marked using this pin as a center punch, I took this stuff apart and decided that I was going to be clever and actually make a drill bit bushing for inside of this handle, so that I could get a very accurate hole placement. I wanted the angle to be very precise, and I kind of went a little over the top, as I do with many things. This pulls apart very easily. As you can see, you take those 2 bolts out, that pulls off, and then you simply remove this bolt here, and the whole handle assembly pops right off. You can take a 10mm wrench and remove this nut. It shouldn't be too tight. And then you can also remove this handle. It just spins off. That nut that I removed is a lock nut. Once you've got that, this is spring loaded and this pin will come out. You can then take this pin and turn that down to, I mean, you can choose what you want to turn it down to. I turned mine to 3.5 millimeters. And then I got a 3.5 millimeter drill bit. I would recommend that you do away with using a drill bushing or any sort of drill guide. This material is very thin and the angle doesn't matter too much. It's only about 3 millimeters thick, which means that you do need to be careful. The belt is in behind there, so if you drill through too aggressively, you're going to drill into the belt and damage it. Fortunately, the gear kit does come with 2 spare belts, but you don't want to be replacing one because you drilled into the belt. So just keep mind of that. Anyway, do away with the drill bushing, drill that hole in there. Now I'll tell you guys how I messed up. I created this drill bushing, which I thought was very clever, and then I put this lever back on here, and I put this gear back on here, and I tightened these bolts into place. What I failed to do is actually put this bolt in place. And because I didn't put this one in place, the lever was able to move left to right or horizontally. So even though I had taken great care to make sure that my holes were in the right place vertically, I messed up and ended up getting 2 of the holes in the wrong place horizontally and actually had to widen them a little bit. It still works perfectly fine, but I did make a bit of a mess of it, and it would have been a whole lot nicer if I would have just put the holes in the right place in the first place. I figured now would be a good time to mention a few things. First one being that I have never actually done a gear swap on one of these lathes before, so you guys get to watch me struggle through it for the very first time. Second thing is that it is a very bad idea to wear a hoodie around a lathe, especially one with laces. So don't do that. Also, gloves are not a great idea. I will just be working on this today, not using it, but yeah, safety first, kids. If you're interested in purchasing a Vevor lathe or perhaps an upgrade gear kit, there is an affiliate link as well as a discount code in the description below. If you use that affiliate link to make your purchase, it helps me out as I get a small kickback. All right, that is easy enough. 4mm bolt. This one happens to be a 5mm. A good thing to know anytime you're changing gears on one of these lathes is to make sure to put the key on the top side when you pull this gear off, because there is a little key in there that will go flying, and it doesn't come with a spare, so you're going to have to be creative and make one or order one and wait if you happen to lose it. So putting the key at the top makes it less likely that you're going to lose it. Now that I've said that, it's probably going to go flying across the room. Did we lose it? Oh, here it is right here. Okay, there was a little bushing on behind there as well, so we'll pull that off and we'll keep all this stuff together. This one comes off much easier, but this metal bushing is going to get reused, so we do need to get these plastic gears off of that metal bushing. This bag of gears appears to be the one that we want first. We want to replace the plastic gears that come on this selector. So it looks like we've got this one that will replace that, and then this one that will replace that one. So now we just need to get the right sized wrench. Do we already have it? Oh, we do. Oh, yes. It has a shoulder on it, and I think that shoulder is supposed to go against the lever. That's what we'll do anyway. I'm going to put a little dab of grease on the shaft before I put the gears on. There's no oiling port or anything like that, so I feel like grease should be used. If you don't agree, fight with me down in the comments. I personally feel like grease will stay in place where oil would probably run out. Wow, that's nice and buttery smooth. Might not be the right thing to do, but it sure does make me feel good. Is that an R. Kelly song? Might actually be a Hank 3 song. Okay, 2 gears down, and however many there are to go. That feels really nice. I think grease was a good choice, folks. I don't know why you're arguing with me. The next 2 gears on the chopping block are the ones that go on this little thing, whatever you call this. And I am quite pleased about it because that means we get to put some grease on here as well. And it is metal on metal, so it is in need of some grease. It actually doesn't feel bad, but it'll make me feel a whole lot better when I know that I've greased it up. We're going to tell ourselves that we'll keep them for spares, but the truth of the matter is they will never get used again. Alright, it looks like this has to come apart from the other side from that C-clip. So what we'll do is we'll put this 40-tooth gear on here. And we'll put this back on. I tell you what, that fits a whole lot nicer than that fits a whole lot nicer than the plastic gear. Tighten that on, and then we'll grab a set of snap ring pliers. Let's see if I can do this. Oh yeah. First take. Did not expect that. How naive was I to head into this project without a flat screwdriver? Who do I think I am? Okay, so I don't know if I said it already, but this was a 40-tooth gear that went on the outside. And then the one that goes on the inside is a 45. We've got to get this key out of there so that we can get some grease in onto the surface inside there, because I'm not going to be happy putting this back together before we grease that up. Okay, there we go. We got the key out. There's a little bit of oil on here. I'm not satisfied with the oil. That is nice and buttery smooth now, folks. I'm so happy. Okay, so we've got the key back in place. Put the gear in place. All right, we are completely seated in place. Everything still rotates nice and smooth. Let's put our snap ring back on. It helps when you actually get the pliers in the holes. There we go. Okay, so we've got 4 gears replaced. What do we have left? I guess what we need to do is start reassembling this, and we'll find out what gears. Rough casting. I get distracted so easy. Your job is to film, Joel. Focus. We have now replaced 4 gears. I suppose in order to figure out what is next, we'll start putting this stuff back together. So this needs to go in here. I'm going to put a bit of grease on this. It's probably not necessary, but if nothing else, it'll stop it from rusting. Screw the handle on. Lastly, put the lock nut in place and snug it up with a 10mm wrench. I'm now going to put a little bit of grease on the end of this shaft. Actually, put some in this hole as well. And this goes on there, just like that. Okay, what do we have left now? What we have left is these 2 gears, which are going to be stubbornly pressed onto this bushing or whatever you call it. It's going to take 2 screwdrivers probably to get them apart. There we go. All right, 6 gears down. These are both, well, I guess this is was set up for threading, so these are both 60s. These are the replacement 60-tooth gears. Let's see, this goes on there. And that must go like that. Put this collar back on, and the key. I've decided I'm going to set this back up the way it was before I started the conversion. I had it set up to cut 1.5mm pitch threads. So I'm going to put these same gears back in. We're putting a little grease on this bushing. So for 1.5 we've got 40, 60, 60, 40. You know what, folks? Other than the mistakes that I made, assuming that I needed to change more gears than I did, well, I guess we'll just edit that part out. It's a good idea to have this stuff apart to inspect it. I can check everything now. And also these bolts were a little bit loose, So even if you don't have to take yours apart, it'd be a good idea to check to see if those bolts are tight or not, because ours weren't. So I'm going to clean everything up real quick here and pop it back together. Other than the mistakes that I made, assuming that I needed to change more gears than I did, this was so easy, it's almost not worth making a video out of. I'm sure it's going to make some nasty noises because it's got metal gears now. Power switch is off. Okay, so we're going to put it in neutral. Turn the power on. Forward. Much nicer with that belt set up properly now. Let's put it in forward. Oh yeah, it's going to be noisy. It's going to be a noisy one. To be fair, this is set up for threading. You would never really turn it that fast. Put it in left feed. Put it in right feed. There you have it, folks. This turned out to be quite a bit easier than I thought it was going to be. Not a single plastic gear left in this lathe. Over here we've got a big old bag of plastic gears that will very likely never get used again, and a lovely assortment of metal gears that will absolutely get used. This was quite easy. If your lathe has the high-low range feature, then you are going to have a little bit more work to do. You're going to have to pull the spindle out of the head and actually replace this gear that goes on over the spindle. At least I believe that's where it goes. And this one sits below it in the head, just underneath the spindle. Because we don't have that feature, we didn't have to replace those gears. This kit also came with this cog. I believe that is for a different lathe as well. I don't see one of those on this lathe. We also got a spare primary gear. This goes on the back of the spindle. This is the main drive, and ours was already metal. Some of these are plastic from the factory, but we've got a spare one because ours was already metal. We also got a spare cog for the drive belt on the motor. It was perfectly fine on this, so we didn't replace that. On top of this lovely Christmas tree of gears, we've also got these metal gears that we didn't have to replace because ours were already metal. And other than the gears that you saw me replace or swap out in here for cross feeding and threading, we've got this lovely Christmas tree assortment of gears that can be used for all sorts of different thread pitches and feed rates. That's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please remember to leave a thumbs up. And if you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe. Just off camera over there, I am starting a conversion on my milling machine, converting it over to operate on CNC. So you might be interested in that. You may also be interested in your very own Vevor mini lathe. If so, there's an affiliate link as well as a discount code in the description below. Down there, you will also find links to my Patreon account, my second YouTube channel, and my Teespring. All of those links can be found below. That is going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.